After years of my dad enabling his entitled wife's stepmom toxic behavior, I finally went no contact when she attacked my kid over a wedding dispute. She called my son useless at dinner. I said nothing until I found her second set of books. This morning, her lawyer left me 8 voicemails. The last one, "Please show mercy." She mocked my son's tears and called him weak. I planted a camera in his backpack. Now I have 47 voicemails, and the last one is from her therapist, begging me to respond. She called my son weak and mocked his tears. I was quiet, but I planted a hidden camera. Now her therapist left me a voicemail begging for mercy. I always thought I understood my father. He'd been a steady presence in my life, someone I could rely on if the entire world fell apart. When my mom and he divorced, I was only 12. My mom moved out of state, and for a time, my father and I were all we had. In those days, he was warm, although a little distant, like he wasn't sure how to be both mom and dad at once. Then, 3 years later, when I was 15, he married a woman named Celia. My new stepmom was 34 at the time, quite a bit younger than him. At first, I tried to be polite, if only for Dad's sake. But the moment I saw her in action, I sensed trouble. She had this inner controlling, intense, and hungry for attention. She insisted on organizing every holiday and birthday we had, from the decorations to the guest list. And if someone complained, she'd get this dark look in her eyes that screamed, "How dare you?" Of course, Dad told me she just wanted to be part of the family. "She never had a real family before," he said. "She's just excited, that's all." The subtext was always the same: humor her for my sake. As an awkward teenager, I had little power anyway, so I kept my mouth shut and let her do whatever she wanted. That pattern continued for years. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, she planned them all. Everything had to be hosted at her place, or a venue she booked, with her color schemes and her choice of fancy dinnerware. Whenever I tried to explain a different approach, maybe simpler decorations or a smaller budget, she'd wave me off with, "Oh, honey, you just don't get it. This is how it's supposed to be done." And Dad would shrug, as if to say, "Please, just go along with her." I left for college at 18, eager for independence. Over time, I visited less and less, partly because I was busy, but mostly because stepping into my old house felt like stepping on Celia's stage. Eventually, I moved to a different city for work. It was only in my mid-20s, when I got engaged to the love of my life, Jane, that Celia's controlling streak escalated into something truly alarming. Jane, 26F, is my fiancée, now my wife. We got engaged a couple years ago, but life took a turn when Jane's father died in a car accident, along with his second wife. That couple left behind Luke, who was barely a year old. Since Jane was the only relative capable of caring for him, her older siblings lived far away, and the younger ones were too young themselves. She took custody. I moved in with her during the pandemic, so Luke has basically grown up calling me by my first name. We've never forced him to use Dad, though in my heart, he is absolutely my son. Celia always had a snide remark about him, like he was some alien intruder. Her favorite line was, "He's not really family." At first, it was subtle. She'd frown if he touched something in her living room or say things like, "Oh, I guess I'll have to childproof again." I'd grit my teeth, remind myself that Luke's well-being was paramount, and just ignore her jabs. Jane, on the other hand, is more direct. She confronted Celia once, telling her, "You might not see Luke as yours, but he's ours, and you will respect him." Celia rolled her eyes and retorted, "I can't be expected to coddle every random child who ends up on my doorstep." My father insisted Celia was just adjusting to big changes. I wanted to believe that, but deep inside, I had a growing dread that one day she'd cross a line. After Luke settled in, we planned our wedding. Because Jane got pregnant soon after we got engaged, we postponed the date. By the time we resumed wedding preparations, Celia was practically gnawing at the bit to take over. She wanted to be the wedding planner. More than that, she wanted to be recognized as mother of the groom, front and center on all the invitations and seating charts. We had an actual professional planner. We also had ideas of our own. A small, intimate venue, Luke as a ring bearer along with our toddler son, born right before we finalized new wedding plans. A friend officiating. Minimal fuss. This was our vision. Celia tried everything, calling the planner behind our backs, showing up unannounced to Jane's dress appointments, emailing me Pinterest boards with wild color palettes and monstrous ice sculptures. When I said no, she complained to Dad, who'd call me with the same old script, "Can't you just humor her?" And Celia resented Jane for not letting her be mother of the groom. "I'm your mother now," she once said. "You have to include. My people will expect it." But that was only half the problem. The more pressing issue was her hostility toward Luke. She seemed furious that he was such a beloved presence in my family. My cousins adored him. My aunts would coo over him like he was the new baby in the extended clan. "Celia?" She'd glare from the corner, as if Luke were stealing the attention that was rightfully hers. We tried so hard to avoid leaving the kids with Celia. Usually, my mom or Jane's siblings took over if we had somewhere to be. But that Sunday, everyone was out of reach, and we had no choice. Dad sounded cheerful on the phone. "Of course I'll watch them. Celia's out with friends, no need to worry." We should have known better. When we returned, the door was slightly ajar, and an awful shrieking poured out. Inside, we found Luke sobbing, clutching his lip. Blood speckled his chin, and our toddler wailed, scrambling away from Celia. She was raging in the center of the living room, voice quivering with fury. "He's not family," she spat. "He's not going to be any ring bearer, over my dead body." Dad stood there, ghost pale, holding an ice pack. His eyes darted between Celia and Luke, as if he couldn't decide whom to protect. Jane rushed to Luke, pulling him close and gently checking his injury. I demanded, "What happened?" Dad's voice shook. She hit him." Celia crossed her arms defiantly. "He was disrespectful, bragging about the wedding party." I felt a white-hot surge of rage. "Get out," I growled, pointing at the door. She refused, so I grabbed her arm and practically hauled her outside. Dad tried to slip between us, looking desperate. "Stop," he pleaded. "It's not that bad. Luke's okay, see? Just." I shoved him aside before he could finish. I'd never laid a hand on my father before, but I wasn't letting anyone, including him, stand in the way of protecting my son. Celia stumbled onto the porch, screeching insults that echoed through the night air. Early the next morning, we filed a police report. Luke's pediatrician confirmed a bruised lip, nothing requiring stitches, but still disturbing enough to prove neglect and violence. The partial nanny cam audio captured Celia's screeching, words dripping with venom, "He is not family." When she was charged with child abuse, I felt a grim sense of relief. At least the law recognized what she'd done. Later that week, Dad called, voice strained. "You've blown this out of proportion," he muttered. "She only slapped him once." My blood ran cold. "That's one slap too many." He sighed. "If she can't come to the wedding, neither will I." To make matters worse, Dad spun a story that I was punishing Celia for minor disciplinary action, swaying half his siblings to boycott the ceremony. I couldn't believe he'd defend her. Luke, my baby, needed Jane. We were done. I remember gripping Jane's hand that evening, feeling her own anger and heartbreak. "She only slapped him once," Dad repeated whenever I confronted him, as if that single assault was forgivable. But a single act of cruelty is still cruelty, and I wasn't about to sacrifice Luke's safety on the altar of my father's fragile pride. To protect my family, we pursued a restraining order. Celia's lawyer, the public defender, apparently, gave up quickly once they saw we had doctor's notes, photos, text messages, and the nanny cam footage of her screeching. The judge granted a 500-foot order. Celia glared at me in court like I'd just ruined her life plan, but that was it. My father approached me outside the courtroom. He said in a quiet, tense voice, "You're breaking my heart." I replied, "You broke mine when you stood by her instead of your own grandson." He gave me a pained look, but said nothing. Celia stomped off, without even glancing at him. That scene was etched in my memory as a turning point. I truly realized how alone Dad was, how alone he had chosen to be. For a couple of weeks, I avoided his calls. When I finally picked up one night, his voice was subdued, almost defeated. "She's my wife," he said. I can't just leave her, you know. She attacked my child, I answered flatly. He sighed. She had a rough childhood. She doesn't know better. She feels threatened by how you never included her. I cut him off. Dad, I'm done making excuses for a grown woman who hits a 4-year-old. If you won't condemn that, then I guess we have nothing left to say. He tried again. Please, you have to understand, she's always felt excluded from your family. I raised my voice, nearly shaking. She's the one who's excluded everyone else. I'm done. Don't ever defend her actions again. I hung up. I don't recall crying that night, but Jane later told me I sat at the kitchen table with a blank stare for 2 hours, not moving. I guess I was grieving the final collapse of my childhood illusions. About a month after the restraining order was granted, my younger sister, Laura, called me. She still lived near Dad and occasionally saw him. She sounded shaken. Hey, can you talk? Yeah, sure, you sound off. What's going on? I overheard them arguing, Dad and Celia. He was yelling about missing business funds, something about thousands of dollars gone. She admitted taking it, saying she was owed that money and Dad would have wasted it anyway. Honestly, she sounded unhinged. A long exhale follows. Wow, did Dad call the police? I think he's about to. I heard him say he's pressing charges for theft and that this is the last straw. She started yelling he was heartless, that nobody ever loved her. Then she dropped this huge revelation. She grew up in a state orphanage, was abused there, and figured no one ever protected her, so why should she protect anyone else? Oh my gosh, I can't even process it. I felt my heart stuttering in my chest. For years, Dad had insisted Celia never had a real family. But I never realized the depth of it. She was an orphan, apparently. She'd been abused. That might explain her obsession with controlling every family event, but it didn't excuse violence or theft. The next day, Dad actually pressed charges for theft from his business account. My sister told me that in the heat of the moment, Celia had thrown a vase across the living room, screaming that she had every right to the money. The cops came, and in a desperate bid to avoid jail, Celia agreed to something called a pretrial diversion program, which included mandatory therapy and partial restitution. Celia's therapy began with raw confessions that left her trembling. Dad described her emerging from each session pale, eyes haunted, then locking herself away for hours. Even through the door, her muffled cries rippled with a lifetime of secrets she could no longer bury. He phoned me one afternoon, voice quivering. They're making her relive that orphanage beatings, starvation. She never told me any of this. My stomach twisted. It's tragic she endured that, but it doesn't erase what she did to Luke. A shaky breath. She said she feels no empathy for kids. Controlling everything was the only way she survived. I'm scared for her. My heart pounded. She hurt my son. She called him worthless. No childhood trauma justifies that. Silence hovered. I wondered if he still believed she could be saved, if he hoped I'd allow her near Luke. But I felt only Luke's terror. Nothing else mattered. She deserves help, I said firmly, but never again at my child's expense. He exhaled, raw defeat filling the line. We both knew there was no going back. 3 months into her therapy, Celia abruptly stopped attending. She had completed the mandated number of sessions, barely enough to scratch the surface of her trauma, and then refused to continue. The mental health professionals urged her to keep going, but she wouldn't. Laura described how Celia started drinking heavily right after. Cheap wine, hard liquor, whatever she could find. Dad discovered empty bottles under the bathroom sink behind the sofa. Their fights escalated. The stolen money was mostly paid back. She sold some personal items to cover it, but that betrayal still hung between them like a toxic cloud. One night, Dad returned from work to find her slumped on the living room floor, half-conscious, muttering about nightmares. She told him she dreamed she was back in the orphanage, a little girl screaming for help. He tried to comfort her, but she lashed out. You're just like them. You pretend to care, but you only want me to be quiet. Days later, she vanished. Dad found a note that read, I can't do this. I can't face everything. I'm checking in somewhere. It didn't say where. He filed a missing persons report. The next afternoon, she called him from a rehab center. She'd checked in voluntarily. Dad didn't tell me until after she'd spent a week there. I think he was ashamed or maybe just overwhelmed. But ironically, I felt relief. At least she wouldn't wander around drunk or lash out at any more children. I remember that morning all too well. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was pouring cereal for Luke, the milk carton nearly slipping from my grip. There it was, my father's name flashing on the screen. Ever since I told him not to bother coming to the wedding, if he planned on defending Celia, our conversations had been shallow at best. Sports, the weather. Never the real issue. The havoc Celia unleashed on our family. He started this call the same way as always, asking how Jane was feeling now that her belly had grown so much. I responded with quick, one-syllable answers. My eyes flicked over to Luke, who was tracing pictures on a coloring page, blissfully unaware of the tension just feet away. A sigh drifted through the phone. She wrote me a letter from rehab, he finally admitted. My heart thudded. She did? He cleared his throat, like he was bracing himself. She apologized, not just to me but to Luke as well. Said she was sorry she couldn't love him. Claimed she never even knew how. I couldn't speak for a beat. My stomach clenched with a sudden rush of anger and something that felt uncomfortably like pity. That's enlightening, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. But it changes nothing. A strained hush filled the line before he exhaled. I pressed charges for her theft because I was furious. Now I'm questioning if I failed her, maybe if I'd known her past. My grip tightened around the phone. She systematically traumatized us for years. Luke still has nightmares. You can't rewrite that with a sob story. He paused. I know. Another sigh. This one laced with regret. I just wish. I cut him off, knowing if I let him continue, he might waver back into the same denial that nearly broke us. Sometimes wishes don't matter. She hurt Luke. That's the reality. We ended the call without any real conclusion. As I placed the phone on the counter, I found myself shaking. What if Dad tried to bring Celia back into our lives, armed with her apology? Jane walked into the kitchen at that moment, instinctively noticing my tense posture. She rested a gentle hand on my arm. Is everything okay? I glanced at Luke, who was humming a tune under his breath, crayons scattered around. He says Celia wrote a letter from rehab. Says she's sorry. Jane's face hardened. Sorry for physically harming a child? Sorry for turning our wedding plans into a personal battleground? Sorry for lying, stealing, and humiliating us all this time? I had no answer. The question lingered in the air, a reminder that Celia's remorse, serial or not, would never erase the damage. Compassion might acknowledge that she was once a victim too, but it stops where my son's safety begins. That night, I sat alone on the couch after Luke fell asleep. My phone lay silent, no more calls. My thoughts circled. Could anything fix what she destroyed? And a darker one followed. If Dad can't let go of the idea that she's still worth saving, will I lose him entirely? Rain pattered on the windows, a soft percussion that mirrored my unease. In the dim glow of the living room lamp, I realized there were no simple answers left. I had told him not to come to the wedding unless he stood with us, and a part of me still prayed he'd show up alone, offering the olive branch I craved. But as of now, that hope felt fragile, like a thread that might snap under the weight of Celia's manipulations. Because no matter how many apologies she wrote, her cruelty remained etched into our family's story like a scar that might fade over time, but would never truly vanish. I woke on my wedding day with excitement and dread twisting in my gut. Jane was my forever partner, yet Celia's memory weighed on me. A tiny voice whispered, "What if she appears?" By mid-morning, guests crowded the venue, arranging flowers and decorations. Luke, in his little suit, smoothed his bow tie and whispered, "I'm ready." That innocent determination reminded me why I was fighting so hard for our family. When the ceremony started, my heart thudded in my chest. Luke and our toddler walked in hand, drawing delighted gasps. I felt both pride and a lingering ache knowing how close we'd come to disaster. Then Jane, radiant in white, stepped down the aisle. For a moment, Celia's shadow disappeared, and I saw only the woman I loved. But then I noticed my father at the back, shoulders drooping, hair grayer than I recalled. One small nod told me he'd come alone. Relief or anger? I wasn't sure. The ceremony itself was perfect. Luke solemnly handed over the rings, and Jane and I exchanged vows. Yet Dad's haunted expression hinted at the mistakes he couldn't undo. At the reception, he lingered by an untouched slice of cake. When I approached, he murmured, "I nearly stayed away, but I had to see you. I'm sorry for everything." My throat tightened. I thanked him, battling my own storm of resentment and pain. My family needed me calm, so I let the past lie for now. A few weeks later, Dad told Laura he'd gotten word Celia finished rehab and slipped away with no forwarding address. She left a note on the counter, apologizing for the money, for Luke, and for her own inability to love. She wrote that she was leaving so we could have peace. I read that note 3 times, torn between anger and pity. She'd grown up abused, only to become an abuser herself. Locking my phone, I realized that chapter was finally over. Celia was gone, and we would rebuild from the wreckage she left behind. Life moved on, slowly at first. Luke turned 5. We discovered he loved dinosaurs. She'd run around the living room roaring like a T-Rex, reciting random dino facts he found in picture books. He still had nightmares sometimes, dreaming about a woman screaming at him. Jane and I took him to therapy, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. We worked on building his confidence, affirming that he is loved, safe, and absolutely part of our family. Jane gave birth to our second baby right around the time Luke started calling me Dad in front of other people. It was unplanned. He just said it casually at the dinner table. "Dad, can you pass the salt?" I remember pausing, tears in my eyes, passing him the salt shaker and whispering, "Sure, buddy." That single word felt like a gift I didn't know I needed. Meanwhile, Dad tried to piece his own life together. He visited me once or twice, apologetically. We never discussed Celia in detail. He sold the old house, the one I grew up in, the one Celia had redecorated so thoroughly I barely recognized it. He moved to a smaller condo. We see each other on occasion, but it's guarded. He is the father I love, but also the man who let my child be hurt. I'm working through that contradiction in my own therapy sessions. Progress is slow, but it's something. One evening, maybe 4 months after Celia disappeared, I got a surprising text from an old friend of hers. I wasn't aware they still had my number. She said she received a random voicemail from Celia, who'd apparently tried to phone her from some unknown location. The friend forwarded me the voicemail. In it, Celia's voice sounded shaky and worn. 2. Don't know who I am anymore. The therapy made everything so real. I spent my life trying to control people because no one ever cared about me. I'm sorry, especially to the little boy I hurt. He was just so small. I didn't know how to be gentle. I only knew how to demand. Please, if you talk to them, tell them I'm sorry. There was no number to call back, no location, no final goodbye, just that. I listened in stunned silence. My chest felt heavy, as though I was breathing underwater. Compassion flickered, but so did memory. The sound of Luke sobbing echoed in my mind. The sight of blood on his lip, the recollection of her shrieking, "You're not family," overshadowed any sense of poor Celia. I set my phone aside and walked upstairs to check on Luke, who was asleep in his race car bed, hugging a plush T-Rex. I leaned against the doorway, thinking, he's safe, he's loved, and she's gone. That was enough. Now, more than a year has passed since that horrifying incident. Luke is in kindergarten, bright and chatty, forging new friendships. Our toddler runs around squealing, "Luke!" every time he sees his brother. Jane is my rock-fierce, kind, everything I want in a partner. I've realized that no matter how chaotic life can be, as long as we stand together, we'll overcome anything. Do I forgive Celia? No, not really. But I've reached a point of acceptance. She was a broken person shaped by unimaginable trauma, left to her own twisted devices. She hurt me, my father, and worst of all, my child. I wish her healing. I hope she never harms another child again, but I'll never open the door for her to come back into our lives. My father regrets so much he's told me that many times. He can't believe he let her roam free in the same house as Luke. He can't believe he fell in love with a woman who manipulated him, stole his money, and destroyed her own life in the process. He's in therapy now too, grappling with guilt and codependency. We're slowly rebuilding a father-son bond, but it's brand new territory. The difference is that I set boundaries. Luke is off limits, and if Dad can't respect that or tries to defend Celia's behavior again, we won't see him. He knows I'm serious. In a strange way, I see why Celia was so obsessed with hosting everything, with orchestrating holidays, birthdays, baby showers. She grew up in an environment where she had no control, no sense of belonging, so she latched onto the idea of family gatherings, as if orchestrating every detail would magically give her the love she lacked. But real love can't be forced or demanded. It flows from genuine connection, kindness, and respect. Family is not about the blood in your veins. It's about the people who stand by you, who protect you, who never let you down deliberately, and who apologize sincerely if they do. Celia could have been part of that family if she'd chosen honesty and compassion. Instead, she chose control and cruelty. If there's one thing I've learned through this ordeal, it's that healing is possible, but not guaranteed. Celia's experiences twisted her into someone who believed that controlling others was the only path to security. The therapy forced her to face her demons, but that alone doesn't promise redemption. She fled when things got too painful, vanished into the ether. Will she ever be truly free from her past? That's her journey, no longer ours. As for me, I live in the present. Each day, I see Luke's gring-ap-toothed, joyous and my heart swells. I watch my toddler chase after him, determined to keep up. I see Jane across the room, eyes sparkling with that unwavering love she's always had for us. We're not perfect. We have our arguments, our challenges. But we stand together, stronger than Celia's hatred, stronger than the shadows that tried to tear us apart. I once believed losing my father's approval was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I know better. Losing my self-respect would have been far worse. By protecting Luke, by standing up to Celia, I finally broke the cycle of enabling. My father might still be struggling, but I can see him slowly emerging from Celia's toxic cloud. One day, perhaps we'll have a truly healthy father-son relationship, or maybe not. Either way, my mind is clearer, my heart lighter. To anyone who wonders if they should cut ties with a toxic family member, your safety, your children's safety, and your peace come first. You are not obligated to endure abuse just because of the word family. Boundaries are not cruelty. They're necessary for love to survive. So here I stand, newly married, father of 2 wonderful kids, forging a path that Celia can't touch. The past is the past. And if she ever does reappear with sincere remorse, it won't change the fact that I must keep my children safe. Some lines, once crossed, can never be walked back. And that's enough for me.